Hi, and thank you for joining me for another short talk. And friends, today I wanted to speak to you about this whole Barkan wine issue because it's really getting out of hand. And it's a bit weird that many are surprised that I'm not for the boycotting of Barkan or Eid Haretis just because I am for defending converts or those suffering injustices in the religious world. As a matter of fact, I think that at the end of this talk, you will see how because I am for converts, I cannot buy into the fake news surrounding this whole story. Now, to start off, if you didn't know, that the Barkan winery in Israel, which is actually the third largest winery in the state, was accused of racism because the Hashgacha, the kosher authority that represents the company, ordered them to remove certain Ethiopians from having any involvement in the manufacturing of any wines they represent or give a hechsher for. And of course, this was deemed racist because Ethiopians are black and the members of Eid Haretis or Eid Haredit, the Hashgacha, are white. And we're just supposed to believe that. And even worse, left-leaning Orthodox activist rabbis who almost always fan the flames of anything anti-Haredi hopped on board, making this just another fake news story that pushes the stupid agenda that Western whites are by definition racist. And yes, I know Israel's not geographically in the West, but it might as well be. So why are Ethiopians in Israel treated in such a manner? And no, friends, this is not the only instance that something similar has occurred against Ethiopians. Like, for example, Chabad has been denying entry to Ethiopians into their yeshivas for years, right? But no one attacks Chabad because they probably wouldn't be hosted at a Chabad house the next time they find themselves overseas. But no, if the left-wing media mentions something, people are protesting, Allah is dropping sponsorship, and I even heard that there are Facebook groups that are shutting down for 48 hours in protest. And rabbis don't try to clear this up. But anyways, friends, here's the story of the Ethiopian Jews. Look, Israel, both in 1984 and 1981, flew the vast majority of Jews of Ethiopia into the state, although there was Ethiopians migrating into the state as far back as the 1930s. And it's not that this community was unknown, but there was even a famous tshuva of the Radbaz in the 1500s that speaks about the existence of Ethiopian Jews, and even according to the Radbaz, he considered them Jewish. However, there was a huge problem when the Ethiopians first arrived in Israel in the 1980s, and that is that although they were accepted as ethnic Jews by the Sochnut, the Jewish agency, the question is, what was their status going to be halachically? Mainly because the Ethiopian community did not have Torah Sheba'al Peh. They did not have rabbinic/oral law. And in Ethiopia, on their own, they really developed their own traditions and in many cases contradicted what we call halakha today, which would mean that in the worst case scenario, that because they did not observe the laws of Kedushin or Gittin, the laws regarding marriage and divorce as outlined in Jewish law, that the probability that many had the status of mamzerim was very high. Not to mention all the other consequences of ceremonially living almost like a Samaritan or a Karaite, right, till stepping into the state, which then they did accept Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the suggestion among the vast majority of rabbis of the time was to accept them and strive to help them, but just to require them to undergo what is known as a gir lechumra, a conversion done just in case, that would free them from any doubt of their halachic status within the Jewish world. Now, this is actually what is done with any person claiming to be one of the B'nai Anusim, or people who have trouble verifying their Jewishness. But no, because Rabbi Ovadia Yosef in 1973 ruled that they should be accepted as full halachic Jews, then the vast majority of Ethiopians refused to convert, and thus this suffix arose if Ethiopians actually have the status of kosher Jews. Now, what most people protesting today don't know is that Rav Ovadia Yosef at the time was a dat yachid, a das yachid, a lone voice in this area. However, Rav Ovadia Yosef, was the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel at the time and did speak for virtually all the Sephardi world. Now, I know that many who just barely found out about this story think that the Badat is in some way some lone racist entity, while the vast majority of rabbis were in some way for accepting Ethiopians without a proper conversion. But friends, this is not the case. Just to name a few of the leading rabbis of that time who supported their reconversion: Rabbi Wallenberg, the Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Shach, Rav Eliyashiv, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Yitzhak Weiss, and the list goes on and on. And friends, just as a reminder for Sfardim, that, Sfardim really should not be poskening for anyone else other than Sfardim, or those who choose to accept their rulings. In other words, if you're Ashkenazi, it really shouldn't matter what a Sephardi posek brings down, again, unless you want to accept it, right? But Rav Ovadia was known for poskening for other communities, which is really not here or there, but it does apply in this case, especially when trying to understand how many Rabbanim actually endorsed his Pesach. Now, how do I hold? Well, I think that they really all should be made to go through a quickie conversion, just like if you claim, like I said, to be one of the Bnei Anusim or belong to any group or family that does not have a verifiable Hazakah, that they came from a Torah-observant pedigree, which would also include about 20% of the accepted religious Jewish world today, who in many cases, because of racial profiling, are accepted as full kosher Jews just because they happen to look Eastern European under the guise of this new Kiruv movement. So yes, I'm aware that we have lots of problems. Now, you must also know that similar concerns are also expressed in Israel today for Russians and Jews from India. So why would we assume that now it's because of race? But anyways, the main problem, friends, with having people who might have a Gentile status working with wine is tied to the Isser of Yayin Nesech, or really, in our case, what is known as Stam Yainam. Now, Yayin Nesech, as you know, or probably already know, refers to wine which is poured in the service of idolatry, which would not be the case here, and Stam Yainam refers to wine which might have been poured in a service for idolatry. So because of that uncertainty, Chazal decree that wine which is left unattended by a non-Jew, or in our case, a possible non-Jew, was not kosher. Now, I understand, Sveikas in rabbinic rulings, I'm all for trying to find ways to bend the rules. However, I'm not for flat out breaking them. In other words, going lahaka is not what many left-leaning Orthodox rabbis are proposing in this area, which, from what I've read and what I've heard, is what they're actually proposing is nothing short than disposing of this halakha, and this is something that cannot be done. Again, this is the case with the Barkan issue. It's about halakha, it's not about racism. And yes, this would also apply for secular Jews too. It has nothing to do with race or ethnicity, which also tells us that this would apply to anyone who applied to work in any winery or factory in Israel who didn't either have a proper hazakah and accept an understanding to who their ancestors were, and if they kept Torah Shebiktav and Torah Sheba'al-Peh, or like we said about secular Jews, that if they didn't keep Torah in general, they still couldn't be left alone with the wine. In other words, the reason this is not racism, again, is clear and simple, because they would do the same if it was a Russian, a Karaite, Samaritans, heck, Muslims, a Druze, a Christian, black or white. In other words, if these workers would have just agreed to a simple gir lechumra, quickie conversion for the sake of their jobs, they would never have been let go. So why call it racist then? Easy, because the Jewish left wants you to. Now look, I do sympathize with those who fight against the insularity that is often found amongst Haredim, the bigoted statements we see some of them make about anyone who looks or acts differently than they do. But that for sure does not mean that we have to incorrectly judge halachic issues out of this resentment. And those who have seen my lectures in the past know that I fight tooth and nail to make a difference in the insular world of Jewish Orthodoxy, which is why I focus so much of my time on the roots of bigotry and not just what the Jewish left instructs me to attack. For example, where's there a boycott against the Syrians or Syrian rabbis for not accepting converts as Jews, any converts, or the outcry for the thousands who've had their conversions revoked just because the Rabbanut decided to reject a rabbi who they once endorsed? In other words, I think that the biggest issue at play here is the fact that people will do whatever they have to not to be deemed or associated with converts, which is why the Ethiopians are in the position they're in today, trying to avoid conversion like the plague. And not because they also necessarily look down on converts, but rather because they see the writing on the wall and they know the hell that converts go through, which is probably why they know better than to fall into that camp. However, regarding Ada Haredis in general, their Badat is actually one who has performed thousands of conversions in the land of Israel, right? For people of all races. So, no, they themselves are not racist. Okay, bigoted in some areas, yes, the Haredi world needs lots of work, but not racist, and not for sure in this issue. But anyways, to recap, the Barkan wine issue is a halakhic one and not a racist one. And those within the Orthodox world who called it racist really should know better. Friends, for more information about everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org. Thank you.